Welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, where avocado toast and stocks meet. Did you know that women and women of color don't talk that much about money? And did you also know that the health and wellness community is a $600 billion business? And did you also know that women aren't in the forefront when it comes to decision making with our health and wealth? We're here to change that. This is the first podcast that focuses on wellness and money. This podcast is targeted for women and women of color, specifically in their 20s and 30s. And without further ado, your host, Eugenie George. Hello, welcome to the Money and Flow podcast. This is your host, Eugenie George. Super excited that you're here. I am very excited about this next couple of months because, one, we're getting into spring, but two, there is so much amazing things that are happening when it comes to women and women of color. People are releasing books out. So my favorite white girl magic guru, what's her name? Biet Simikin. She has a book that talks about ancestral trauma, so I'm excited about that. I'm excited to read Glow Maven's book that talks about childbirthing and being a doula, because for some people, if you haven't been aware, childbirth is still, or women dying after childbirth is still a big thing, which is crazy because we live in the 21st century. So her talking about that, having a book about it, is amazing. I haven't read Erica Chide. Was it Chingo? No, not Chide. Erica's book. And I'm excited about that. So there are lots of amazing things. Oh, plus Minda, who has Secure the Bag, Secure the Seat. She has a book that's coming out. Clever Girl Finance, Bola has a book coming out. There is so much magic when it comes to ancestral trauma, money, understanding your money stories. It is a perfect segue to our episode today. So it's a little bit different. We have a mini episode. It's also, you're getting it on Thursday, and normally you get your episodes on Wednesday. I had kind of an issue with Lipson or my podcast hosting, so I'm going to post a Wild Does interview on Friday. So if you have the weekend, you're going on a trip, you're going skiing, you're doing something fun, this would be a great podcast to listen to because she is all about winning life. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about the Black money story, the African American woman's money story. And I wanted to make sure that this episode is not only filled with very detailed information, but also how we can use that money story to help us. So the first podcast that we talked about with Money Story was Madam C.J. Walker. Was she a bomb entrepreneur? Yes. Did she do all these amazing things for Black women and women as a whole being entrepreneurs? Yes. She is very pivotal to how we think, how we move when it comes to being an entrepreneur, being a small business. I mean, without her, there would be no Mary Kay. There's so many different things that she contributed to make sure that we have what we know today as Road and Fields and all of those other MLM marketing. So it's pretty amazing to see something like that. But today I wanted to talk a little bit more about the historical context when it comes to our money and why that's so important. So, little backstory. When I was getting into the financial planning industry, which is, I'm still doing that right now, I was really stuck and very frustrated because I would see all these amazing people making a lot of money when it came to financial planning. I just kept getting frustrated because I didn't see a lot of women. I didn't see a lot of women of color, and it was really frustrating. And I wanted to know why, what was the historical context for financial planning? What was the historical context for women and money? So that is why I started writing a book about it. But the other thing is, because I knew this information, I was able to better serve people, to better understand why people do what they do. A lot of the things that we have problems with, specifically when it comes to money in America as a whole, it has to do with our ancestry. We don't talk about it a lot. And I was just talking to my boyfriend about this the other day, is that we don't know how to address it. We don't know how to truly address money, and we don't have a framework to talk about privilege and what that means. So my book is an attempt to write about the framework, but then also understand that depending on where you're from, it has to do with race and class. So having all of those backgrounds and all those pieces will help us build a better ancestry. So today we're going to talk about African Americans. So for some of y'all, we know slavery, Jim Crow laws, and why that's such a big push, or such a historical piece of history for us to know. But there is also another piece, which is the banking industry. So Wells Fargo used to be a black-owned bank. There are lots of other banks that were black-owned banks, and then they turned into American banks. So I wanted to talk about that. There are 2 books that explain perfectly racial discrimination, the gaps of wealth, and why that's so important. One is The Color of Wealth. I'm going to preach this probably for my entire podcast career. And the other is The Color of Law. It's interesting because The Color of Wealth takes each ethnicity and breaks it down based off a historical context. And The Color of Law is by a Berkeley professor who pretty much it gives a very great definition of why there is so much racial discrimination and what are the laws in place. And I think it's really good when we talk about privilege, when we talk about fragility. That is a very, very important book because the person that wrote it was white. So it's very important for us to look at the past, even though we don't want to look at it sometimes. It's very good to look at the past in order to create that new future. Like Marianne Williamson always says, you take that future, or you take the past, you look at it, you rev in it, you cry about it, and then you chuck it, and then you create a new future. So we do really need to know these patterns. So for a long period of time, people of color and accessing wealth has always been limited. There are a number of laws and acts that have discriminated people of color in the past from the financial industry and the financial service. After the Civil War, President Lincoln wanted to create financial literacy for African Americans transitioning into freedom. So during the Civil War, all of these soldiers had this money and people didn't know what to do with the money. So President Lincoln and I believe there was 2 or 3 other men that said that we need to create a black bank for African Americans. So that was the first time that had ever been thought of. It was right after slavery, and that was called the Freedman Bureau Act. So it was established to start black banks for African Americans. The goal is to push African Americans upward for mobility after the slavery era. Now, the problem with this is it turned out to be a disaster in disguise because a lot of the propaganda, a lot of the implementations were only saying that black people need to save. There was never anything about how do you leverage debt. There was never anything about how you clearly can't get FICO scores back then, but how you can leverage buying a home, purchasing land. Never that. It was always black people want to save, which is amazing because if you think about our ethnicity, if you think about African Americans' ethnicity, we are good savers. We're good savers because that is something that we have learned. Now, the problem with the Freedman Bank, because even though it was the fastest growing bank in the United States, one, it was only targeted to African Americans, not by African Americans. So it was not a FUBU scenario, okay? If you don't FUBU your stuff, there's some parts where you can't FUBU it, but you have to FUBU some parts of your bank in order to build trust. So at the time, and this was in 1873, The bank at its peak had 37 offices in different cities. So they were in Philadelphia, they were in Charlotte, they were in DC, and they had $57 million saved by African Americans. So we know that that is a positive piece. Now, the real problem was in 1873, there was this company called Seneca Sandstone Company, and they were approved an unsecured loan. So they took money out of the Freedman Bank, and once they took money out of the Freedman Bank, they did not pay it back. And the person that loaned and authorized this unsecured debt was Henry D. Cook, and he was one of the board members. Clearly, we know that those two people were white, and they decided to take a lot of money out. So when the bank loan went into default, the depositors were the ones that lost all the money. Next thing you know, Frederick Douglass, you know how he is. He came in, was as a bank director. When all that stuff when like shit hit the fan. I'm sorry, I never curse on this show, but I had to. When shit hits the fan, Frederick Douglass came in, had no clue what was happening. So he put about $1 million in he put, I believe it was $100,000 from his personal funds into the bank, but had no clue what was happening. Next thing you know, guess what happened? Douglas found that the bank had done all of this crazy money laundering, had given all these creditors money, and Frederick Douglass thinks that the bank, the Freedman Bank, was worse than slavery, which is crazy. I've never heard something like that, but he thought that was worse than slavery because it was a promise by Congress, and it was the first promise after being freed. So that's the first touch of financial planning when it comes to newly freed African Americans. That's the first time that Black people had the option to invest in their future. There are lots of other books, the Black Banks. I cannot stress the importance, but what I want to say specifically with this mini episode is some folks say, well, that happened a long time ago. But if we put it under a financial planning lens, we put it under a money story lens. My great aunt is 98 years old. Okay. Her mom was a sharecropper. So we look at her life. She was around during the Great Depression. She was around during the Civil Rights movement. She was around for a lot of historical things. If she's 98 years old and her mom was a sharecropper, that's only 3 generations ago. That is such a short period of time. So if we really think about wealth and wealth growth and wealth accumulation, that is a reason why if you talk to families that are African American, they still hide their money in a shoebox. If I talk to one of my favorite aunts who has done well for so long, she still doesn't trust financial advisors. There is a reason why that happens. So it is really up to us as millennials. It's up to us as financial planners, because I know that some of y'all are financial planners that are listening. It is up to us to actually build those pieces together, because if we don't build the pieces, then who's going to? But it is important to understand the money story with Black banks. And honestly, if we look at the Latinx community, if we look at the Asian American community, there are stories like this that are told and are repeated multiple times. So I wanted to make sure that before we get into the Win Life, that we kind of understand how and why certain Black people don't trust banks. And it makes a lot of sense once you actually look at the historical context. Now, for the next episode, we are going to talk about how to win life and how following the status quo when it comes to having a job, having a business didn't work for Awilda. The next episode that we're going to talk a little bit more about the book concepts, just like this one. We're going to talk about why we hate math and how us hating math, or us as Americans saying that we're not good at math, is creating a blockage when it comes to building our money story. So that's pretty much it today. Really short, super simple. But what I want to stress out is that there are tons of stories that we're telling ourselves. And for some reason, when it comes to our money, we disconnect some of the past. But the truth is that our ancestry has a lot to do with what we're investing in, what we believe in, and our values. And even though we want to believe that we are completely independent of that, that's not the case. Well, love you guys. And make sure you check out, we have the Money and Flow podcast Instagram. We are also revving up a newsletter. So we'll have a lot of tips and tricks. Plus, within the next 6 months, 1, the book's going to be out, and 2, the actual Money and Flow method is going to come out. So I'm excited about that. Please stay tuned. Tell your mom, tell your daddy, tell everybody that you want. Love you. Take care.